Welcome to Eat, Sleep, Wine, Repeat, a podcast for all you wine lovers who, if you're like me, just cannot get enough of the good stuff. I'm Janina, your host, brand ambassador, wine educator, and sommelier. So stick with me as we dive deeper into this ever-evolving, wonderful world of wine. And wherever you are listening to this, cheers to you.
Hello, wine friends, and welcome back to the podcast, where today we are heading somewhere that every curious wine lover needs to have on their radar. This is Armenia. I mean, this is one of the oldest wine cultures in the world, and yet still one of the least understood. So, in this episode, we're going to be uncovering why Armenia may be one of the most exciting wine destinations for adventurous drinkers and travelers right now. We're going to explore how altitude and volcanic soils shape Armenian wines into something fresh, structured, and completely distinctive. The indigenous grape varieties you absolutely need to know about, and why this ancient winemaking country is entering a rather fascinating new era that's blending tradition with real modern precision. And joining me today is the brilliant Caroline Gilby. Caroline is a master of wine, award-winning writer, international wine judge, consultant, and one of the world's leading experts on Central and Eastern European wine. She has spent decades traveling through lesser-known wine regions, documenting the extraordinary transformation happening across countries like Armenia, Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary. And with her background in science and a career spanning buying, judging, consulting, and wine education, there are very few people better placed to explain what does Armenian wine taste like. And make sure you stay to the end of the episode, because Caroline also shares what it's like to visit this hidden corner of the wine world. And if you are feeling adventurous, maybe you're going to want to put this trip on your travel list. So pour yourself a glass, get comfortable, and let us dive into the fascinating world of Armenian wine. Caroline, you are in the wine chair. So I have to start by asking you, you actually qualified and working in the science world before wine caught your attention, right? So I'd love to know, how did that transition happen?
Yes, I have a couple of degrees in plant sciences, and it was while I was studying for my doctorate at the University of Bath that I joined the Wine Society there, on the basis that I liked wine but didn't know anything about it. And I gradually got hooked, organising tastings, joining the committee. I won a couple of tasting competitions. So Decanter Macallan Malt Whisky Taster of the Year in 1987.
That is very impressive.
We won World Wine Tasting Team of the Year at the long since defunct Bristol International Wine Fair.
I imagine that would have been fun.
It was fun, yes, it was fun. But yes, and then my road to Damascus moment actually came because I won a decanter competition. Who knew I'd be a judge and writer for them many years later?
It's funny, isn't it?
But yes, it was a trip to stay at Quinta de Noval, answer 3 questions, names go in a hat. Never won anything in my life before.
Wow.
And it was there sitting on the terrace with the Douro glittering in the distance, sipping chilled tawny port, that I thought maybe life in the wine trade would be better than life behind a microscope. So, yep, that was the moment I decided to look for a job in wine.
I think that just goes to show when we talk about wine travel, like there is nothing. I hope everyone listening, you're feeling inspired by this episode and all the previous episodes, but nothing better than going to the region itself and absorbing the culture, the energy, and of course, tasting the wines, is there? And you've been doing that for quite a while now. I mean, you have spent literally decades exploring Central and Eastern Europe. We've just been talking, you are constantly on the road, are you not? So what initially drew you to these regions rather than Chile, America, Australia, or simply France, you know?
Yeah, well, again, it goes back to that first job in the wine trade. I was offered a job as a trainee wine buyer and quality controller by a, again, long since defunct chain of wine shops called Augustus Barnett. And
no, don't know that.
yeah,
Okay.
so this was 1988. I started my career in wine. And at the time, I was buying for the whole of the Bass group. Again, Bass no longer exists because it's been divided up and sold on. But at the time, we had 550 or so wine shops off licenses. We had about 4,500 pubs of our own. We had 22,000 free trade accounts and Toby restaurants, holiday inns. So as the buying team for the off licenses bought for the whole group because that was the setup. So, but as junior buyer in the team, they gave me my first two buying responsibilities were Eastern Europe and Italy.
Interesting.
So I cut my teeth, really. I mean, at that time, Eastern Europe was huge business in the UK. Bulgaria was the fourth biggest supplier of red wine into the UK market, but it wasn't glamorous. So that's where I cut my teeth when it was still under the old communist, collectivized, large state wineries model. So I was buying from Bulgaria, Yugoslavia. I added Hungary quite quickly in the early 1990s. So I was kind of in at the tail end of the old era, the beginning of the new era. But when I left buying, I then had a bit of a break and I thought I was going to specialise in Italian wine. And it wasn't until the 2000s, Tom Stevenson approached me because he was looking for somebody who could write on Eastern Europe for a new book project he was launching. And then that was kind of, right, okay, it's not a totally blank canvas. Let's give it a go. And it snowballed from there.
Amazing. And as you just said to me before we started recording, you could talk about Armenian wine until the cows come home. So I'm excited now to really learn from you because my knowledge of Armenia is very limited other than the main grape variety, Areni Noir, and trying a few. So I imagine many people listening also feel the same. Can we start with describing the region of Armenia?
Yes, I mean, it's such a fascinating country. It's so dramatic. Every direction you turn, there are mountains. You've got the backdrop of Mount Ararat. I could tell you about my adventures climbing Mount Ararat if you like, but that's the spiritual mountain.
Was it successful?
Well, the expedition was successful. For me, not. I got altitude sickness in spite of being the fittest person in the group, but hey.
Oh, God.
It was still an amazing experience. But Ararat, even though it's not actually in today's Armenia, it's a spiritual mountain for Armenians. It's, it's on your passport stamp. It's the backdrop to the capital city, Yerevan, and sort of everywhere you go, there are mountains surrounding you. In fact, Armenia is a very mountainous country. The average altitude is 1,000 meters and the vineyards average 850 meters. So mountains do make a difference because, you're obviously the far side of the Black Sea on the edge of Asia, and it can be pretty hot in the summer. But being at altitude obviously makes a difference in moderating the climate. Cold winters with lots of snow cover and fresh breezes that we all talk about so often, but they really do make a difference in Armenia.
And actually, the soils, there's a lot of volcanic soils, is there not?
Yes, a lot of volcanic soils, and degraded, Yes, just trying to think whether there are some bits that aren't volcanic, but volcanic bedrock is, and it's obviously a hot topic at the moment in winemaking because of the sort of styles of wine that volcanic soils tend to produce.
Well, precisely. Are you finding, so volcanic soils often do give this brighter maybe acidity, that mineral edge, perhaps more linearity, the wines that I've tasted. And of course, this lovely, ashy, smoky, flinty, whatever minerality you're going to pick up. Would you say that is all true as a general description then of Armenian wine?
Well, yes, but I mean, this mineral term is a complicated one because, literally vine roots do not pick up different minerals from volcanic bedrock compared to limestone but the pH, the water availability, the fertility of the soil all have an impact on the style of grapes. And volcanic bedrock tends to be quite low fertility in terms of, there's not a lot of clay, there's not a lot of volcanic, a lot of humus, not a lot of vegetative matter in the soil. So they tend to be quite low fertility, which has an impact then on the yield of the grapes and the style of the fruit. And you get those much more linear, quite often more acid-driven styles. But I think it's about the linearity of the styles. But yeah.
Well, we'll talk a little bit about more the grape variety so people can get to know what there is on offer. But volcanic, for that reason, I know that there are quite a few pre-phylloxera vines because that evil little louse can't survive in volcanic soils. Is this something that they are championing, having some pre-phylloxera vines? Do they have lots, or actually have so many of them been pulled up?
Yeah, well, it's a complicated picture because Armenia, even though it has an incredibly long association with winemaking and grapevines, was actually designated as a brandy country under Stalin.
Really?
Yes. So, and there is actually a very famous, they used to produce a very significant amount of the premium brandies that went into the Soviet Union. And the most famous brandy being Ararat, funnily enough. But yes, so that meant that during the Armenian Soviet Socialist Republic period, a lot of the old grapevines were uprooted in favour of, mass plantings of neutral grape varieties for brandy. So what has happened is, there are some areas where you've got these mass plantings intended for brandy, and there is quite a lot of phylloxera in Armenia. But there are areas like, for instance, around Vayots Dzor, where it was too hilly and too remote. And for whatever reason, phylloxera does not survive there, whether it's the cold winters or the volcanic soils or what. There isn't. So in those areas, there are vines that have, literally time forgot that, at least 100 years old and possibly many, many centuries old if you look at, because people could propagate by just planting, suckers into the ground and the next vine would root. So you get these amazing higgledy-piggledy bits of vineyards, but only really in these very remote areas where Stalinism and that collectivism didn't happen. So people are pretty paranoid, though, about phylloxera.
Right.
I remember going to visit Karas, one of the bigger wineries, and, you've got to have all your shoes disinfected. The tyres have to be disinfected because for the moment they don't have phylloxera, but it's nearby.
Yeah, always a threat. Now, so there are some that at least now protecting those older vines. You mentioned Vayots Dzor, which, as far as I know, is kind of like the flagship wine region. If you were going to go to one region of Armenia, would you recommend this one?
I would, because it's kind of in some ways, ground zero of the modern Armenian wine industry.
Okay.
And there's a real buzz of interesting wineries around there. And you've also got the Areni-1 Cave, which I can't not talk about.
Of course. Well, talk about it now.
Yeah. So the first time I went to Armenia was in 2011 specifically to visit a young winery called Zorah, who had just kind of started. And I knew when Yeraz and Zorik, because they're Armenian diaspora who have a fashion business in Italy, and decided that they wanted to have a winery, as so many people do. And they were thinking about Tuscany, and then they both decided that they would like to go back and explore their Armenian roots. And they ended up exploring the country and settling on a village called Rind, which in Vayots Dzor, to have their winery and their vineyards, which they started planting in about 2003 with the help of a really smart Italian consultant, and somehow managed to discover a couple of local grape varieties, particularly this Areni Noir, which was one of the first things they planted. But at that time, they did not know that literally sort of 5 kilometres away in the Karst Hills, there was this incredible historic site, the Areni-1 Cave. And it's a karst cave with a very special atmosphere that has preserved organic materials really well. So the first thing that was found that made an impression on the world was this shoe that's like 5,900 years old, which looks like it could be from the Middle Ages, and then as the researchers, and it was about between 2011 onwards that the research started to emerge from this cave. And what they found in there was the oldest organised winemaking that had ever been discovered. So it's a proper winery in that there's a grape press, there are clay jars, karas as they're called in Armenian, that were big enough that it had to be organised winemaking. And it's a really spine-chilling place to go because the wine equipment is all surrounded by grave caskets. So 6,000 years ago,
wow,
wine and human ritual, there's also some evidence of human sacrifice and other kind of quite creepy things in there.
Yeah.
But the point being that wine and human ritual were already deeply, deeply intertwined 6,000 years ago. And people were organised in their winemaking. They had to be to produce those kind of quantities.
Wow. I mean, Armenia is often described as one of the oldest winemaking regions in the world. This cave also helps with that theory. How do you find that with all of that history, how's that showing up today in the way the winemakers are making wine?
Yeah, well, I mean, I described it as in some masterclasses I did recently as the newest, oldest wine country. Because, say, in terms of, I mean, Georgia has older evidence of grape growing, to be fair, but 6,000, 8,000 years ago, the national borders that exist today, Anyway, so we know this Caucasus region is very old in terms of winemaking and very old. It's now been identified as one of the centres of grapevine domestication about 11,000 years ago. So there is that deeply ingrained attachment to wine and to grape growing as a culture. Armenia then went on to become the first official Christian nation, and we know Christians and wine are deeply intertwined. And wine has always been important in Armenian history, and grape growing has been. But so it was very heavily interrupted by that socialist Soviet Republic period. And it's kind of taken a few expat visionaries to go back and to say, actually, we've got some amazing stuff here. We've got 300 indigenous grape varieties. We've got these ancient pre-phylloxera vines. We've got this really significant culture around grapevines. But it's really only since, in 2011, I was lucky enough to taste the first vintage of Zorah. But at that time, most of the wines were terrible. And there were very few people making anything that wasn't oxidized and volatile and really funky and just nasty. So it's really, really burgeoned from then with, Armenians are incredibly proud people. They reckon they invented everything. Coffee, green dye for dollar bills, you talk to Armenians, they reckon they invented everything. They're very proud. And what wine offers them, particularly for the expats coming back, is something that's very close to the land and very close to their cultural values.
Okay, but it's beautiful that they have that passion, and now quite clearly a little better understanding of modern winemaking.
Yes.
That's the useful part. So we're talking about the fact with the identity of Armenia, they have a lot of indigenous grape varieties. And we've touched on one already, which is Areni Noir. So, I mean, this would be, in your opinion, the grape variety to try first if you wanted to explore Armenian wine?
Yes, I'm a huge believer in Areni Noir, or Severeni as it's often called. Because what does it offer? It offers high quality, it offers deliciousness. It is something that is deeply connected to Armenia and its history. And I describe it as it's kind of Pinot Noir meets Corvina for me.
Yeah.
So it's not generally a heavy grape. It's more about elegance, and it can be beautiful. It can be long-lived. Not that there's a long history of winemaking in today's quality. As I say, it's only a couple of decades old, really, for modern winemaking in Armenia. But most importantly, make delicious, exciting, high-quality wines, red wines.
Yeah, and I think actually, like that you said, like that's a great description, Pinot Noir with Corvina, because it has a bit more intensity, the Arenis that I've had, but at the same time, it's never full-bodied, and the tannins are always very, very soft. And because of that high acidity, there seems like there's a lovely elegance, probably helped by being planted at high altitude as well. So, Areni Noir, tick. I am now lost. I have no more grape varieties to offer.
Well, if I tell you some more, it probably doesn't help. You've got things like Hagtanak, Kaket, Voskehat, Garandamak, Hatun
I
Haji.
have heard would I be right, though? Voskehat is probably the most famous white.
Yes.
Okay, so should we stick with that? We've talked about, this is the beginner's guide to Armenian wine. We've said Areni for the red.
Yeah.
Voskehat for the white. What would that taste like?
Yeah, I mean, Voskehat, again, I think it's a really exciting grape variety. And in this world where, maybe there are fewer really exciting white grapes than there are reds, it's very versatile. You can do sparkling with it. You can do fresh whites. You can do oaked whites. You can do Karas, clay fermented whites. It can age beautifully. And it has, how would I describe it? It has a sort of fresh pear, sometimes a little bit of honey about it, sometimes a little bit of a floral note, a nice salinity about it, lemon peel, lemon zest character. Sort of just trying to think if I can think of a parallel. Harsh Levallois is probably the closest I can get to it, but I'm not sure that helps most people.
A fresh white with a slightly herbal floral.
Yeah, herbal floral,
edge,
spicy edge to it, but it's more than just a fresh white. It has this textural saline quality to it as well that makes it
interesting.
Really exciting as a white grape variety. I mean, Armenians describe it as the queen of their grapes, but not that I like sexism in wine terms. But
but good to know that it's up there.
Yeah.
Okay, so these are the two.
Yeah.
But you did roll off a whole load of other indigenous grape varieties that I've already forgotten.
Yeah.
Is there a recognised number, more or less, of either the amount of indigenous grape varieties that Armenia has, or at least that they're typically using?
Yeah, I mean, they claim to have over 300 indigenous grape varieties.
Claim.
The numbers I have from the Vine and Wine Foundation are about 55 actually grown commercially, and about 30 to 30-ish, let's say, grown for winemaking. But the thing is, you end up, every time I go and do a tasting with the Armenians, you discover that there's somebody who's making rosé wine from Tozot, or there's somebody who's making wine from Neneni, of which there's half a hectare in the world, so that they've rescued from a few vines. So there's quite a lot of this dynamism of people kind of rescuing old grape varieties that weren't commercial, and suddenly somebody's making wine from them again.
But I guess that's exactly what you're saying. This is the newest old world wine growing country.
Yeah.
And they're experimenting.
Yes.
They're figuring out what do they want to be known for, I guess. So let's not confuse things. Unless you obviously come up with the story of another grape, we're going to stick with Areni Noir and Voskehat as the white to really at least try and remember. Everyone walk away from this episode with these two grape varieties. Both of them, presumably, if we go back to Vayots Dzor, which is the main flagship wine region, you're going to be able to find quite a few good examples. Am I right?
Yes, there are certainly a few. Yes, there's some really good producers from that region, and I'm just Just trying to think what's available in the UK. Certainly there is definitely Voskehat. There's definitely Areni Noir. There are one or two other things also available in the UK. Yeah.
Well, I think, again, don't worry, people listening, this is a global podcast.
Yes.
So hopefully a little bit will be dotted around, but also let's fly to Armenia. I mean, okay, flying to Armenia, let's talk about this for a second. I imagine that Vayots Dzor is not necessarily completely set up for slick wine tourism, or am I wrong? How is it to go and visit?
Definitely not. I mean, but there are some, I mean, last time I stayed in a little B&B in a village with home cooked food and
oh, beautiful.
Yeah, I mean,
what would be your advice though as a wine lover? You've got on a flight to Armenia. First of all, how do you get to Vayots Dzor, and what should you be prepared for? How could you go to Zorah Winery, who are one of the biggest and the leaders in terms of quality?
That's a good question. I would have to ask if they are kind of open to the public.
Ah, interesting. So we don't actually even know. So
okay. It's not a question I always think to ask because I tend to travel as a professional.
Yeah, precisely. Okay. What I'm going to do, everybody listening, is I will investigate if you can go to any of these places, and I'll put it in the show notes. Okay, I'm going to do some research from a commercial point of view, and I'm putting it in the show notes. And how far away is Vayots Dzor from the capital? How much travel time do you need to do? Because this is in the south, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay.
If I remember correctly, it's sort of a couple of hours. The roads aren't great.
That's not a surprise. And it's mountainous and it's rugged. I'm sure you're upping and downing.
Yes. But, it's very scenic and So
it's worth it. Okay. So you need to prepare. I mean, this is really a very dedicated going back in time kind of travel, it seems.
Yes. It's not, going for a slick sort of Californian wine tour. This is definitely going out into the wilds. But, the people are so hospitable. The food's great. Everybody's incredibly welcoming. And there are some really amazing, some wineries with amazing restaurants. Old Bridge is one, fantastic local food. And also some great wines. Make some fantastic Areni, coincidentally.
Good to know.
So there are a number of wineries that, you might have to phone or email or arrange a visit, but I'm sure it's possible.
But you know what? When you go to regions that are less travelled, as you said, the locals tend to be actually so much kinder. They want to open their hospitality out because it doesn't happen so often, and they get to be passionate and proud about what they have. Whereas if it's past tourists, you haven't got time for that. So, okay, a slightly slower pace of life will be found if we go.
Well, it is. And I think people enjoy the fact that you've gone to the trouble of going to find out about them and go off the beaten track. And then there are other things to do, visiting Areni-1 Cave, which I think you can do now under strictly controlled circumstances, but there are fantastic monasteries close by that are well worth exploring, and can even go and run a trail half marathon from Zorah, which I have run.
Interesting.
Yes, the Armenia, what do they call it? The Armenia Vine Trail. I've got a certificate from it somewhere up here.
You get, I love that. You get to do it.
Yeah.
Run or walk.
Yeah.
Past, I'm assuming, a lot of vines then. And you get a certificate afterwards to prove you did it.
Yes. And you get a glass of some nice Areni at the end of the...
Sign me up. I mean, how often do they... But this obviously isn't organised. This is not you just go and do it independently.
Yes, no, you have to enter. It's an organised race that you have to enter. But it's a lot of fun. But it's quite shocking because you're so high up. You're starting at well over 1,000 metres, more like 1,400 metres, and going up to about 1,700 metres. And your lungs go,
oh gosh,
what did you do with the air? I mean, you really can feel it.
As we know... Yeah, for you definitely as well. Your lungs definitely don't want to go up to 1,700 metres. So that is another thing to put on the list for anyone interested in exploring. We've talked about Vayots Dzor. That's again, I'm saying it again and again because it's like just trying to remember the main region. But there are other wine regions. I mean, Vayots Dzor is very, very much about the altitude, I think, from what I know, finesse, and of course, Areni.
Mm-hmm.
What other regions are upcoming or offering a different style to Vayots Dzor?
Yes, well, I mean, you've got Tavush in the northeast. Got my geography right, which is quite different. It's much wetter, a milder climate, and there's a winery in particular, Northern Terroir, that use Lalvari and Banats to make actually some really nice white wines and sparkling wines.
And sorry, are they grape varieties that you
Yes.
just said? So I'm like, are you talking about a wine technology, a type of equipment? Okay, a grape variety.
Lalvari and Banats are more grape varieties.
Thank you.
You know, what you find in some of the other regions is that there are only one or two names that have kind of broken through and made an impression on a bigger scale. And then you've got Ararat region, you've got Aragot-Son, so there are basically 5 wine regions.
Okay.
And they're about, in the country, getting accurate statistics is a little bit challenging, but the estimate is somewhere around 15,000 hectares.
Okay, we'll take it. I can understand why it could be a little bit more difficult. I mean, okay, people who are thinking about Armenia, it's right next to Georgia. What's the difference? I imagine a lot of people are going to think that Armenian wine is just like Georgian wine. How would you talk about the distinction of Armenian wine compared to Georgia? Or even other Eastern European countries?
Yes, I mean, Georgia has very much majored on the sort of more natural, and really focused on the story of Qvevri and, the long skin contact whites. So key differences, grape varieties are different.
Yep.
I think the style of both countries will use clay. In Armenia, the clay vessels are called karas. And
I love that. It's they're being caressed.
Yes. And they're made from it seems they're made from a different clay to the ones, the typical Georgian sort of reddish clay, Qvevri. And the Armenian culture is not these very long skin contact wines, even when they're using clay. The clay is actually quite an interesting challenge because nobody has the technology to make it anymore. And actually Yeraz from Zorah wants to start a pottery school to relearn the skills for making karas, because what people are doing at the moment is going and hunting around the villages and looking in people's old cellars and seeing where they can find these things. They're generally a bit smaller than Georgian ones as well, and often not completely underground. They'll be partly underground.
Almost like the top. Probably maybe like a fifth of the top might still be sticking up.
Sort of third of them, maybe that sort of thing, be above ground, and say that they tend to be a higgledy-piggledy mixture of sizes because it depends what people have been able to find. And obviously they need to find these old clay jars that aren't leaking.
Well, it's interesting you say that because as we talk about Qvevris of Georgia, there are very, very few Qvevri masters, clay pot makers, however they want to actually call themselves, left. And the few that do it are, it's been passed down through history and it's incredibly difficult to make. And of course, as soon as you're shaping it, it's really, really difficult. I've chatted with people about this before, but the fact that they're struggling and obviously passing down the traditions and they don't have that many, and it sounds like in Armenia, like it doesn't exist at all. It's already too late and they have to try and restart again.
Because they have to relearn, the clay, how to handle it, the firing techniques, the ovens that are required to fire big enough vessels. So, and I think that then links back to the Soviet period when Georgia was still a wine country, but Armenia was a brandy country. So the culture of making wine in clay kind of got, pretty much lost because brandy was the designation.
Wow, yeah. Well, I hope they get it back because I think, and we're realising clay pots, the texture that they can give to wine.
I think we're up to about 150 wineries or so in Armenia now. So it really is buzzing. It really has grown from almost nothing in 2010 to... But, I also think Georgia's got, a couple of thousand winemakers. So, yeah.
Precisely. And also, has anyone explained to you, though, the history? It's interesting. You've got Georgia where they're burying their qvevris, their clay pots, completely down into the ground until you just see the top. And you're saying in Armenia, a little bit sticks up, which I have seen in photos. Yeah. But is there a reason why? Is this just something that they did in the past? They didn't fully bury it? Was it for convenience? Has anyone actually talked about why they do it that way? No.
Yes, I'm not sure I know the answer to that. Obviously, you're going to get potentially a little bit more air exchange and a little bit more temperature variation with significant part of the clay being out of the ground. But no, I'm not sure anybody's kind of researched the impact, the difference it has. It'd be quite interesting to put the same wine in a fully buried qvevri as opposed to, I don't know the answer to that.
Interesting. Well, listen, if you don't know the answer to that, I don't think anyone does. Okay, everyone challenge. Find out the answer. Why? Very often when I do talk to winemakers and you say, why do you plant this grape variety if it's not very, you've got 10% of this grape variety in the wine. Oh, yeah, because it's kind of a field blend. It's planted. It's always been planted. Oh, well, what does it taste like? Well, it's pretty neutral. Oh, well, why do you put it in the blend? Oh, well, because it's history. And, well, why do they plant it? Well, it's just what they did. They would plant one plant to this one and 10 to the other. That was just what they did. So it is interesting. Sometimes, though, it's kind of just holding on to something that's traditional, the way things were, and it worked. And it's nice to not lose it. So,
yeah.
Who knows? Well, talking about history, and not a long history, but you've mentioned, you are a judge for Decanter and you're also a consultant. You've been tasting Armenian wine since, I guess, 2011.
Yeah.
15 years, the long 15 years, a decade and a half. Is it that you're finding just more freshness in the wines? What has been the biggest transformation over the 15 years of Armenian wine?
Well, I mean, first of all, cleaning up the winemaking was a huge step because so much of it was just really terrible, oxidized, sold by the roadside kind of stuff. But, even in those wines, when Zoric and Alberto Antonini, his consultant, went to start this project, they could see something that they thought they could work with. I remember sitting there at dinner and after I tasted this first. And it was a really interesting tasting, actually, the first Zorah tasting. Sorry to digress slightly, but it was in a garage by the roadside. So they didn't have a winery at that point, and they'd made the same wine in small carafe, in stainless steel, and in Armenian oak.
Interesting.
So I got to taste the same liquid out of the three different versions, and I and a couple of other people that were with me were like the first outsiders to taste these wines and to see whether we thought they had potential. But yeah, even then it was quite clear that the clay really suited Areni. It gave an amazing textural quality to the tannins in a way that the stainless steel was very hermetic, felt very clinical. And Armenian oak is a different species. It's Quercus mercantura, and it has quite a balsamic, quite obvious character. So
interesting. Okay. So you're saying that showed through. Armenian oak, if it's so different than the oak that you find in France, or even that, Hungary, if we're talking kind of more Eastern Europe, this one's very, very distinguishable.
Yes.
Are they typically any producers using oak, are they sticking with Armenian oak, or are the top wineries or the ones wanting more global recognition just going to the French barrels?
I think it depends a bit on the winery and what they want to achieve, and also politics and war have come into play, because most of the Armenian oak forests were in Nagorno-Karabakh, or Artsakh as the Armenians called it. But of course that has now gone back to Azerbaijan, and access to those forests for the high quality Armenian oak is difficult, shall we say.
Yeah, okay. So at the moment, it's so curious talking to you about this, because I realise, just as you said, this is one of the oldest wine growing regions, but it's so young, it's so new, everyone's experimenting. It's like, I'm here going, give me the style, tell me what I should look for. And actually, I guess you're there regularly, you're tasting these wines, you're one of the most knowledgeable people on this growing wine region, and there isn't really any definite answers.
No,
because
and that's part of what's exciting about this part of the world that I've seen over the years, is that each country has undergone a complete wine revolution, and they've all come out of this shared history of forced collectivism, but they've all come out of it in different ways. And wine is an incredible tool for seeing seeing a place, because it brings together, the landscape, the climate, the terroir, all those things we talk about, but the culture of the people, what grapes they've chosen to grow, how they've chosen to make the wine, all come through in that glass. So it's an amazing tool for understanding a place, is to go and taste their wines. And
absolutely. Well, is there a particular Armenian wine or a moment that's like really stayed with you emotionally, that's kind of really changed your perspective?
Well, yeah, I have to go back to that first trip to Armenia, which I nearly didn't go on because I thought, I'm too busy. I'm never going to, it's an obscure wine country. Maybe I won't bother. I had to fit it in between two other trips. And I did go, and I'm so glad I went, because, it was a complete mind-blowing revelation to actually go to the Areni-1 Cave with Boris Gasparian, the researcher who'd done all the work on this place, to taste the first vintage of Zorah, which was an incredible privilege. So yeah, I think so that was a mind-blowing experience, and I've been back a few times since as well and explored a bit more widely. And yeah, I just love the country, I love the people, and I love the fact that they are so passionate and so proud of their country and rescuing obscure grape varieties and all that kind of thing. It's just amazing.
Oh, gorgeous. If someone is now going, right, I'm going to hunt down some Armenian wine, do you have any advice for them? Is it simply, if you find one, give it a go?
Well, it is really, and you're going to have to go to specialists. So there are a few specialist importers. There is Wines of Armenia in America that the guy's got a really good portfolio. There's a couple of specialist importers in the UK. Zorah and Armas are probably the most easy to find in the UK, because they're both Zorah's with Liberty, Armas is with Hallgarten. So, there is some distribution for those wines around. Definitely, well worth exploring. And they say, but you are going to have to hunt these wines out. They're not mainstream. You're going to have to go looking with specialist importers.
And would you say, for me as well, my feeling, because there's still a lot of experimentation, is perhaps not to go with if you had a selection, maybe not to go with the cheapest wine. I'd feel probably more comfortable hitting that kind of £15 to £30 price point with Armenian wine.
There is one big winery that can do the Armenian Wine and Brandy Company, which doesn't sound very, but actually their wines are quite decent, and they're probably, I don't know, around the 12 to 13, between 10 and £15 mark.
Interesting.
But mostly Armenian wine is not cheap. But
and I can understand why.
I would, it's a long way. It's quite challenging to get wine out of Armenia all the way to the UK, because you've got to go out via, you've got to ship it out through, because Armenia's landlocked.
Well, they're landlocked.
So it's got to go out to the Black Sea, probably to Batumi in Georgia or somewhere like that, to get shipped across the Black Sea, all the way around the Mediterranean and so on. It's quite quite challenging, but I would still argue that even if you're paying sort of £15 to £30, you're still actually getting good value because of the quality that you get for the price you pay.
I have actually, it's funny, I remember I've actually done a video on Zorah's Areni Noir. As I always say in my podcast, when I mention things, I'll put a link in the show notes, although it's so embarrassing. It's like, I don't know, 6-7 years old now. So don't expect any great filming. Definitely, I was in my learning stage. But I just remember it was about £30 a bottle. And I was blown away by it. I just thought it had so much freshness, beautiful concentration. I can't remember the tasting notes right now, but it really did make me excited for what wines are coming out of Armenia. And we've mentioned Zorah. This episode is not sponsored by Zorah. But quite clearly, these guys have really led the way. So I guess all I want to finish off with, we've touched on Armenia, and that is just a country in its rediscovery phase. So should anyone who loves wine want to just join along, obviously have fun and explore with them. But what advice would you give to somebody who wants to deepen their wine knowledge but just feels overwhelmed by the sheer number of regions and styles and countries? What can you give us? What nugget?
I think you've just got to go into it with a mind of wanting to explore and wanting to learn. I mean, that's how I started.
Yeah.
I didn't know much about wine. I knew I liked it, and the more you taste, the more you explore, the more you talk to people, share bottles with people, talk about them. It's a sad bottle of wine that's not shared.
Oh, that's a good quote. Isn't that a good quote? Oh, yes. Is there anything that we have not touched on about Armenian wine that you feel needs to be mentioned?
Well, I should mention, I think, that Armenia, it is just such a fascinating country to visit from a point of view of the culture, the museums. Even I went to the Alphabet Museum in Yerevan, and I thought,
what?
How can an alphabet museum be interesting? But actually the story of the Armenian script is beautiful. And there's a whole museum dedicated to the invention of the Armenian script. And it's amazing.
Okay. That sounds more interesting. I'm just thinking of literally A is for apple, B is for birdie.
It's so there is and I think for many people, the idea of going on a wine holiday, is fine, but people want to see something else other than just wine. They want to see the culture and the landscape and the history, and so definitely well worth exploring the wider countryside and all the amazing monasteries and fantastic scenery and great food as well. So and it's a bit there are similarities with Georgian food, but differences as well. There's a mixture of that kind of sort of Persian, sort of Near Eastern influences as well. Beautiful. So lots of herbs, lots of great cheeses, fantastic vegetables. Yeah, it's all part of wine as culture, which I think if we don't build the story of wine as culture and about sharing rather than just another form of alcohol delivery, then we're a bit lost.
I agree. And I just feel like going to visit Armenia, from what you described, sounds very raw, very rustic, very, very grounding, quite holistic, eye-opening, exciting.
Yes, all those things.
Good. All those things. Thank you so much.
And delicious wines too. So there you go. Got everything.
Who can complain? Thank you so much for your time. I'm feeling inspired. I'm sure everyone else is feeling inspired. Where can people find you to see what you're doing and to learn more from you?
Yes, I'm on Instagram, Caroline Gilby. I'm Caroline Gilby MW on Facebook. I'm on Blue Sky. So yeah, I write for Jancis Robinson. I write for Decanter. I write for most of the wine reference books. Oxford Companion, I do Hugh Johnson's Pocket Wine Guide. Sadly, not Armenia for them, but I do just about everywhere else in the region. World Atlas of Wine, You're
everywhere.
Yeah. So yeah, and I have quite a distinctive name, so I'm quite easy to find out there. So
well, everyone, I'll put a few of those in the show notes again. Thank you so much. May we share a glass soon of Areni Noir. You take care.
Okay, well, cheers to that. Good night.
I hope this episode has inspired you to look beyond the classic wine regions and discover just how exciting Armenia and the wider world of lesser-known wines can be. And if you've got any thoughts, questions, or you've now got a favourite Armenian wine after listening, you're going to find my email address in the show notes. Let me know what you're tasting. And now next week, we're diving into a topic that completely changes how we experience wine in the glass. I'm going to be joined by Max Riedel himself to explore the world of Riedel wine glasses. And to finish today's episode, here is a wine quote for you from American poet John Ciardi. I think that's how you say it. And he said, "Fermentation and civilization are inseparable." A perfect reminder that when we explore ancient wine cultures like Armenia, we are not just tasting wine, we are tasting thousands of years of human history, tradition, and identity in the glass. So pour yourself something interesting this week. Share it with someone that inspires you and that brings you good vibes and just makes you light up. And if you're enjoying the podcast or you're getting value from these conversations, it makes a huge difference if you leave a review on Apple Podcasts, a rating on Spotify, or wherever you're listening today. And if you know another wine lover who'd enjoy this episode, please do share with them, because it just helps the podcast continue to grow and reach more people who love discovering the world of wine. Until next week, wine friends, cheers to you.